beautiful souls. Brittany here. So, you must have turned on this video today because you want to know about guilt and what it is that you can do about it. So, in today's video, I'm going to run through exactly what guilt is according to the A Course in Miracles, and I am going to also go through what to do about guilt, how to correct guilt according to the A Course in Miracles. So, get yourself a notebook, take some notes. I will try and go as slowly as possible and as in depth as possible, and also share some stories and experiences. And if at any time questions pop up, feel free to ask the questions down below. And before I forget, feel free to subscribe and make sure that you click that little icon with the bell on it so you get notifications, because I'm going to be doing a lot more of these, as I've mentioned before. So I want you to get all of them and not miss a beat. So you guys, what is guilt? Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to bring light to, that being A Course in Miracles students, you probably already know, but it's a form of fear, right? So it extends from the thought that we can actually be separate from God, or that we can have a separate will from God. And that is where the guilt originates, okay? So it's not as much of us dealing with the separate forms of guilt or the many different variations that guilt can take. It's realizing that there is a source of guilt and we want to get to the source, okay? A big part of this as well is that guilt seems to follow like our unconscious errors, right? So anytime that we make an error that maybe is associated with like a wrongful behavior, guilt will rise up. Okay, so for example, one of the ways that guilt has shown up in my life a lot is when I have confused the ideas of fantasy with reality. Okay, and so my ego has a tendency to make me want to see that fantasy that little Brittany made up. As you're a young girl and you watch all of these shows and you watch all these Disney things and you really think that there's going to be this Prince Charming that comes and sweeps you off your feet, takes care of everything, pays for everything, does everything for you. It's a fantasy. It's not real and it will never be met. But I have noticed the clashing of what is truth, according to what God has given me, God given us, and the fantasy that I made up in my mind. And so anytime that I have the thoughts of fantasy arise, guilt comes along with it. It's packed its bag. We're going on a guilt trip, So that's one thing that has been kind of like a pattern in my life that I've really had to deal with. So this is coming from experience of having to apply what I'm going to teach you today to these difficulties with guilt. And so another way to kind of look at this as well is that in psychology, guilt is referred to as a feeling that is connected to be a behavior that is judged to be wrong. So I kind of said this already, but it's connected to a behavior that is judged to be wrong. Now see this in relationship to what we're trying to learn with the A Course in Miracles. We're trying to learn with the A Course in Miracles that we are connected to God. God is only loving. So if we have our mind and portions of our unconscious or our subconscious mind dedicated to guilt because we have these wrongful behaviors that we acted out in time at some point, then we're not going to be able to fully experience and immerse ourselves in the love of God because our mind is split. It's entertaining two worlds. So we have to feel connected to the wrongful behavior and thus guilt, and then we have to feel connected to God and his love and our purpose and his plan. And so it's that split feeling, and that's why we will oscillate and kind of have that roller coaster experience in our relationships and inside our emotions. So that's one thing to kind of be mindful of, right? And so this kind of even ties in with something else, that guilt is there and it wants you to remember those wrongful behaviors because it wants to disrupt our goal of peace. And clearly our goal of peace is the Course in Miracles has a goal of peace. Like God's goal is peace. Like our goal as a soul is peace. And so ego and guilt is literally like here to disrupt that goal, like big deals, you guys. So I will give you two examples of how this can disrupt things. One, for example, is like it'll disrupt it with faulty problem solving approaches. So for me, if I see something that is perceived as like a lack associated with the fantasy not being manifested, right? When you perceive something as being wrong, like a problem, my first pattern would always be to like ask Tom, like, how are we going to fix it? What's the answer? What are we going to do? And that can generally result in like blame or annoyance or frustration or anger or war of some regard, right? But what we're learning here is to ask God for what you need and ask God to solve your problem. So the first step in that would be to realize, oh my God, this is what I'm perceiving as a problem. God, how would you have me see this? God, what would you have me do? How would you have me respond? How would you have me deal with this, right? To go to the source. But instead, what ego wants us to do is disrupt the peace and the communication channel between you and Creator and start to seek an answer outside of yourself. That's disruption. You're not going to find peace. You're not going to find the answer in the other person. You're only going to find it between you and your relationship to God. So that's a big disruptor, right? Another disruptor is something that actually was brought to my attention by one of my clients now, dear friends. I love you, Angelica. And I've had this experience too, right? So we've set up our morning routines, and Jesus asks us to do that in the Rules for Decision in chapter 30. And so we're just kind of following what he tells us to do. Ooh, hello. And and so in the morning when you wake up, she was saying that she notices that her first thoughts in her mind are not all the time, but sometimes like, oh my God, I just need more sleep. Like I'm too tired, right? And sure, we're tired, right? But what we're learning is that what we really need is to have that connection between us and God, right? It's sleep isn't going to bring to us what we need. It's awakening that's going to bring to us what we need. Right. So when we actually go through our morning routine and read the course and sit in meditation, and for me, like I do transcendental meditation, and I find when I do that, I'm like lit up. Like I have energy, like I'm just drinking a coffee and I hadn't had coffee in a week, you know? Like it's this sense of just like energy that you need. So it's not sleep that is going to give you that feeling of rest. It's communing with God that's going to give you that feeling of rest. So when ego is offering us that thought of like, oh, I just need more sleep, that's trying to disrupt our peace. That's trying to disrupt our goal of peace. And so like that's something that we need to be vigilant against and to recognize that's coming from guilt. Like that's coming from a split will, a split purpose, and to become aware of that. And so the only way that we are able to correct these things is to become aware of this and to realize what guilt does, where it comes from, how it tweaks us, how it hooks us, all of these things. So this is what I'm getting into today. So as a little recap on what guilt is, it's a form of fear. It comes from the idea that we could possibly be separate from God or from our will that we share with God. It literally comes from unconscious error that we have, done or expressed in this lifetime or even other lifetimes. It also comes from like a connection to a behavior that is judged as wrong by us or by somebody else. That could be anything, you guys, anything. Sex before marriage, that could be just like stealing. That could be anything, right? And also guilt disrupts the goal of peace, okay? Big deals. But you guys, good news, which you probably also know because you are a student of the Course in Miracles, guilt's not real, okay? Guilt is not real, okay? Like our Creator God doesn't know of the mistakes that we've made here. He knows that we cannot hear him. And so that is why he's given us the Holy Spirit as the communication link between us and him and the corrector of our perception. Thank you, God. But he doesn't know of the mistakes that we've made. He doesn't see us guilty. He doesn't see us as sinners. Okay? He doesn't. We see ourselves as sinners when we think through the thoughts of the ego thought system. But we're not sinners. We've made mistakes in our thinking. We've made mistakes in our actions. But the way to correct our actions is to change our thinking. So that's why we're turning there. But guilt's not real. There's a correction for this. Okay, and I will show you. So now we move on to part 2, what to do about it. Okay, so, and I think what's really important here is when you recognize that guilt rises or apathy rises or depression rises or anxiety rises or just those not so good feelings rise, lack arises, those not so good feelings, what's really important is to recognize them and be like, ooh, I see it. Like we don't want to stuff it down and pretend it's not happening. Like we have to bring conscious awareness to what we're feeling. But not to feel guilty for the guilt. And like, this is playing on me, especially like once I became a mom and I had all these responsibilities and I couldn't fly by the seat of my pants anymore. And we had to settle down. And we had to have a home and we had to figure out how we were going to bring in money and we're going to, all of these things. Now I'm starting to include the thoughts of the world and try and figure out how to receive guidance from God in this world. I made mistakes, right? And so guilt wants to pop in, and mom guilt is a real thing, right? Real thing as meaning a shared experience of us here until we transcend it and overcome it and correct it because there's an answer. But we need to recognize that. We need to admit that. And the only way we're going to correct it is by being like, whoa, this is what I feel. This is what's going on. Let me take corrective action. It's not coming up for you to feel bad. It's not coming up for you to be like, why am I feeling this way again? Why is this happening again? It's just happening. It's happening for you to learn it. Okay. This is an experience for you now to ask for correction and do something different than you did before. right? So let's just kind of peel off the guilt, that when the guilt rises, you don't need to feel guilty about the guilt, right? Like I've been there, but like we really have to remember that. So starting there, these thoughts and feelings and emotions are going to rise and they don't feel good, but do your best to be like, oh, this is a lesson. This is a learning opportunity. Let me heed that and go forward with the learning. So the first things that I want to do is kind of bring the course into my lap, okay? So this is from the section in the A Course in Miracles from chapter 4, This Need Not Be. Okay, so I'm going to kind of parse through this with the sections that really relate to guilt specifically, but this is a really juicy section, right? So I really kind of recommend you sitting with it and going through all of the section from beginning to end because it's really powerful. But I'm going to start here in the part 3. So it says, when your mood tells you that you have willed wrongly, and this is so whenever you are not joyous, then know this need not be. In every case, you have thought wrongly about some brother that God created and are perceiving images your ego makes in a darkened glass. And I thought that this was really important, right? Because whenever you're not wholly joyous, you're making shit up. That's what we say around here, right? You're just making shit up, right? And that's a key, right? Like we have an anchor. Like God wills perfect happiness. He wills joy. Joy is the kingdom. And if we're not feeling that, well, then we have stuff to work on. And it's generally because we thought wrongly about some brother. That brother can be a brother, like someone in your life, a relationship, but that brother could also be like you. That could also be Jesus, right? Like it's all these different relationships have to become purified, right? And so I'm going to move right over here to the section 4 because he says, I'm going to read this part here. Think honestly what you have thought that God would not have thought, and what you have not thought that God would have you think. Search sincerely for what you have done and left undone accordingly, and then change your mind to think with God. Okay, I'm even going to pause there a second. He's telling us exactly what to do. You need to search your mind, figure out all the places that are not wholly joyous and aligned with his loving will, and change your mind to think with God. Okay, like this is what he's saying we are able to do as sons of God. Like this is what we're able to do. The Holy Spirit is here to do the correction. We just need to do the act of searching. This is why I said don't feel guilty for the guilt. Recognize the guilt and realize, okay, this is where it's coming from. This is what I'm doing. I need help. Let me change my mind to think with God. And so he says this may seem hard to you, but it is much easier than trying to think against it. Your mind is one with God's. As a loving brother, I am deeply concerned with your mind and urge you to follow my example as you look at yourself and at your brother and see in both the glorious creations of a glorious Father. Okay, so that is a vision that will replace the guilt, is seeing like the glorious love of our Father inside us and in our brothers. So this is the goal. This is what we're reaching towards. Okay, so I'm going to kind of take us step by step through what he says, and I'm going to kind of go through them one by one by reading it, and I'll recap them at the end. So don't worry about trying to write it all down right now. Just listen, and then at the end you can kind of write them down. I'll put the words on the screen to help you pause and write it. But he says here, I'm at number 7. When you feel guilty, know that your ego has indeed violated the laws of God, but you have not. That's a big distinction. Your ego has violated the laws of God, but you, child of God, have not. Leave the sins of the ego to me, meaning Jesus. Leave the sins of the ego to me. That is what the atonement is for. But until you change your mind about those your ego has hurt, the atonement cannot release you. As long as you feel guilty, your ego is in command, because only the ego can experience guilt. This need not be. This need not be. And so notice here that he's saying it's up to you to change your mind. It's up to you to be like, I don't want to think that anymore. It's up to you to be like, I do not want to see that person that way anymore. It is up to you to say, I do not want to see myself this way anymore. That is you actively willing and deciding to change your mind. But until you do that, Jesus can't let the atonement work in your mind because you haven't handed your mind to him to work on it. For as long as you keep it hidden and still think that you're guilty or that another person is guilty, he can't help you. So he's saying, give it up. Like, give it to me. Okay, then the atonement will rest on your mind, but you have to give it to me. Okay, so this is really important. This is like the first step, is realizing, noticing how you feel, but also giving it to him, right? Okay. So then the next one here, This one's a big one. He says, the new habit of engaging with God. Okay, so backtrack. I'm not going to read this part, but he talks about like the ego is like disengaged, right? So it disengages from brothers, it disengages from self, it disengages from purpose, it disengages from the world. It's like a stepping back instead of a stepping into, like a stepping forward, right? It's a disengagement. So he's saying that that's obviously the effect of the ego that wants to preserve its own thought system, that wants to preserve the guilt. So he's saying what you need is new habits to set up your connection with God, to set up the engaging with God. So that's the section I want to read here. He says, the new habit of engaging with God and his creations is easily made if you actively refuse to let your mind slip away. Your problem is not concentration. It is a belief that nobody, including yourself, is worth consistent effort. Side with me consistently against deception. Do not permit the shabby belief, guilt, to pull you back. Okay. Now, the reason why this is really important, because I'm all about habits these days, you guys. I have really, really realized, especially in the last, year and a half, habits are everything. Atomic Habits, by the way, is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, go check it out. It's powerful, right? But he's saying here that the new habit of engaging with God in his creation is easily made if we actively refuse to let our mind slip away. So the way that we can actively refuse to let our mind slip away is by setting up habits for that not to be. That's why I love the morning routine. That's why I created the package. If you want to check it out, the link is below. But the Miracle Morning sets you up to be engaged and connected with our Creator so that you remember what you're here for and what you're doing and who you are as soon as you wake up and open up your eyes in the morning, right? That allows us to literally keep ourselves focused on that and not let our mind slip away. This is the mind training. And this is why Jesus has given us one lesson every single day for 365 days. So we can train our minds not to slip away. So we can train our minds to be focused on God. Okay. So he also says, know that, basically you're worthy of this consistent effort. Okay. He needs your consistent effort. He needs your consistent engagement. You're worthy of it. Okay, you're worthy of it. You need to set up these new habits and you need to be consistent in your efforts on your mind training. And if you do it every single day, every single day, every single day, every single day, that habit will become natural. It'll become part of your being. It won't be something that you do anymore. It'll be something that you are. And that's the whole point in A Course in Miracles, isn't it? To stepping into who you are as God created you to be. It starts with little habits. Okay, so the next one is your mind and mine can unite in shining your ego away and releasing the strength and beauty of God into everything you think and will and do. Do not settle for anything less than this and refuse to accept anything but this as your goal. Watch your mind carefully for any beliefs that hinder its accomplishment and step away from them. Okay? This is really important. He's reminding us of our goal here. This is our shared goal. This is what makes, Course in Miracles and Life on Earth holy, is having this shared goal, right? So he's saying when you ask him for help, right? For example, when I was saying earlier, not asking Tom, but asking Jesus for help, with his power and with his strength, we can shine the ego away. And that releases the strength and the beauty of God in us, and that will release the strength and the beauty of God in others for us to see it. That's forgiveness. Right? That's what forgiveness is. So he says, do not settle for anything less than this. Okay. If you recognize that you have decided wrongly because you're not at peace, you're not wholly joyous, don't settle. Don't settle for any error that's off balance. Don't settle. Just work your way one at a time. Whenever your life pops up a situation for you to look at and to deal with that one. You don't have to deal with all the other ones. Just pop up with whatever one popped up in front of your face and watch your mind carefully. And step away from the error, step away from the guilt as soon as you see it. Oh, I recognize this. I'm not doing this anymore. Jesus, I need help, right? Don't put guilt on guilt. Hand over the guilt to our brother, and he will help us to heal it. Super important. I'm almost done, you guys. Two more parts. So then he says, judge how well you have done this by your own feelings, for this is the one right use of judgment. Judgment, like any other defense, can be used to attack or protect or heal or to harm. The ego should be brought to your own judgment and be found wanting there. Without your own allegiance, protection, and love, it cannot exist. Judge your ego truly, and you must withdraw allegiance, protection, and love from it. This is amazing. This is the correct use of judgment, and he talks about this at the end of the lessons, right? He has a whole thing dedicated to judgment. Judge your ego truly, and you must withdraw allegiance and protection and love from it. So honestly, it's realizing, oh my God, that's insane. You're not insane, but your ego is insane. And when you recognize when your ego is acting insane, that is how you can release your hold on it. But for as long as you justify your feelings, you justify your fear, you justify your upset, okay, you're not going to be able to correct it. Like Jesus can't just take it from you. You have to give it to him. Remember, the laws of God give. Okay, so you need to release this from your mind, hand it over to him, and then he will correct it. Okay, so judge your ego truly as insane and step away from it. Lastly, here, you are a mirror of truth in which God himself shines in perfect clarity. To the ego's dark glass, you need but say this: I will not look there because I know these images are not the truth. Okay, say this with me, you guys. I will not look there because I know these images are not the truth. Okay, this is what you need to say against the ego. This is how we're vigilant for God and not the ego. Because when we recognize the ego pop up, we can just say that one thought, I will not look there because I know these images are not true. And then your mind can turn away and see something else. Then Jesus says, then let the Holy One shine on you in peace, knowing that this and only this must be. Okay, so anything but peace and anything but joy need not be. But peace and joy must be. That's the only thing that must be. Okay, so right now, you guys, this might sound like a lot of words, but let me break it down into those practical steps for you, okay? So to recap on what to do about guilt, period, is one, to notice how you feel and to not feel guilty for feeling the way you feel, but instead to realize that it's time for correction and be grateful that it rose. Be grateful for the situation and be like, okay, I notice this is how I feel. I'm not wholly joyous. I'm not at peace. This need not be, right? So that's the first step. The second one is to set up new habits of engaging with God. Okay, I don't know what that looks like for you. For me, it is a morning routine. For a lot of people, it's a morning routine. Sometimes that might even be like having your phone go off every hour on the hour to remind you to think with God. That might be to be vigilant with your course lessons every single day. That might be to have a set time each day to read the A Course in Miracles. That might be to set up a routine of meditating at least 2 to 3 times a day. Meditation is huge for me. I couldn't always meditate, but that's actually one of the things that I made myself do, is like do it first thing in the morning and get it out of the way so I feel like I succeeded, instead of it looming over my head for the rest of the day and me feeling like I can't accomplish it, right? It's setting up small habits. Genuinely, if you need help setting up these habits, I feel like I've dedicated my life to figure out how to set up habits accordingly to be most successful and to be most peaceful and joyful. If you need help with that, let me know. I've got links to custom coaching below, but this is really important. So first, notice how you feel. Second, set up new habits that are engaging with God. Prayer is a big engagement with God. That's a really big one. But set it up with times, with what you're going to do every day, like specific habits, not just like, oh, I would like to do this. No, you got to be specific in your timing and doing it every single day. That's how it becomes part of your being, right? Number 3 is watch your mind for anything that conflicts with the strength and the beauty of God in you and others. So it's kind of the same thing as notice how you feel, but it's also an active watching of your mind throughout the day. Like if you're going to the grocery store, I've noticed before, go to the grocery store, I see people put groceries on there. I'm like, oh my God, you're going to feed that to your kids. That's a judgment. Okay, this person doesn't know what they're doing. It's not up to me to judge them. It's up to me to only love them. What if they're looking at mine going like, oh my God, I feel so bad that I can't afford that or something. Like I don't want to inspire more guilt in the person. I have to watch my mind all throughout the day. So this is another thing to get rid of the guilt, is I don't want to inspire guilt in another person. If I don't want to feel guilty, I need to watch my mind like a hawk, okay? Number 4, judge with God against errors. So this is where you get to be like, whoop, I recognize that judgment. Whoop, I recognize that guilt. This need not be. Okay, it's back to the same thing. You're almost like overlapping all of these points, right? But we must judge with God against error. And then the 5th one here, you guys, is like ask for correction, right? This is where I go, oh, I need help. Okay, I realize this is how I feel. Okay, I'm going to judge with God that this need not be, and then I need help. Show me how to see this truly. Ask for correction, ask for help. And then the last one here is basically to decide that you want the answer. And this is where Jesus said, I will not look there because I know these images are not real, right? So it is a decision that you're not going to look at the guilt. It's a decision that you're going to look for the answer and you're going to hand that guilt over. It doesn't mean you're bypassing the guilt, you guys. This means that you're letting the guilt be corrected by Jesus and the Holy Spirit because it's their job to correct it, not yours. It's your job to recognize it and to hand it over. Okay, that's it. Recognize and hand it over. And then let the Holy One shine on you. Right now, you can rest in peace and trust that the healing is happening